our series called I Am, where we're walking through the Gospel of John, and we're living in the Gospel of John this whole year and talking through the I Am statements of Jesus. And these were moments in his public ministry when he would make a declaration and a demonstration of who he is. And he'd be making these declarations and demonstrations of who he is and leave people with a choice. Are you going to believe he is who he says he is? Or are you going to discard it as just another person with claims? The challenge is that Jesus had a miracle or a moment that came along with his claims that left people in a bind saying, well, I don't believe what he says, but look what he just did, and how does that relate to what I believe? And as we look at these, we're also going to be left with the question of who is this man? And who is he going to be to me? Today we're going to turn in our Bibles to John chapter 11, and our reading is going to be in John chapter 11, verse 21 through 27. But we're going to walk through a couple things before we get there. Jesus' statement today is this: I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. All of us live with a lot of tension in our lives. We've got difficulty, challenges, grief. Things don't always go the way we want, when we want, and we have tension. We got tension in sometimes our workplaces or our relationships. And many times we think tension is bad. Tension can be bad. It can be negative, but tension can also be good. If you don't have tension in your muscles or joints, they no longer work. I found something in my garage that, sometimes we have things in our garage that are broken and some things that work. 2 tennis rackets right here. One has tension. The other, the squiggly line right here, has lost tension. The string has become broken. Now, these 2 rackets now function differently. One, when it hits a tennis ball, has power in the right hands, has control, has the ability to exert a tremendous amount of force. One has a dead spot, a spot where if the ball hits here, it doesn't perform and act like you hoped it would. And so many times we want to live a tension-free life. And if we think if we could get rid of all the tensions in our life, life would be perfect. But I've got tough news for you today. That's not God's plan. God doesn't have a 3-year discipleship plan here at the church, and when you graduate, you get a house on the beach in Maui. If so, we would have a lot of people committed for 3 years. That's not the way God operates. That's not the way he works in our lives. And many times we live and navigate the tension of life. And tension will either break you or it will propel you. It will either be used as a moment that you give up and give in, or you either hold firm to the faith and belief you profess, and it propels you forward through the obstacles of life. And one of the greatest tensions we live with is death. It's death. Death was something we were never designed to experience. God created Adam and Eve in the garden without sin, and death was never supposed to be part of the picture, but because of sin, because of their choice, death entered into this world and it changed it forever. Death marks the moment in life when the physical body stops working to survive. You breathe your last breath, your heart stops beating, your brain stops. Then what? One of the interesting things about humanity and different cultures and different time periods is throughout history, the thoughts and beliefs when it comes to what happens when you die. What happens when you die? Some people are nihilists. They believe in nihilism, that when you die, it's just the end, that there is nothing. And so the only thing that matters is from the day you were born until the day you die. Others believe in a rebirth, that you get to live multiple lives here on this earth, and that once you die, you just come back in a different life. Other people are reincarnationists, that they believe that your life can then take on the form of plants and animals, and that's why we can't cut down trees, and that's why you can't squish bugs, because you don't know what ancestor that might be. Let me just tell you, I got a gopher in my yard. That thing is driving me crazy. And I'm trying to kill it. So if that offends you, I am sorry. But then there's the God of Scripture who comes in and gives us this picture of heaven and promises that for those that believe in Him, for those that trust in Him, not a penalty when we die, but a reward and a new life in the fullness of life. Each of us have thought about what happens when we die. And even from a young age, if you have young children, the questions about death enter earlier than you're ready to talk about. There's questions in their mind of what happens when we die. Job 14:14 says this, if a man dies, shall he live again? So we see even the ancients asking this question. In Ecclesiastes 3:11, it tells this, that God has put eternity into our hearts. That there's not a person that lives or walks the face of this planet before or will that hasn't had the question of what happens when we die. It's in all of our hearts. And we've been walking through these statements of Jesus and these I am statements, and He's making a declaration and a demonstration that He is the Messiah. He is God sent to this earth, and He's here to change the world. But as we approach John chapter 11, it's the penultimate, it's the climactic moment of Jesus' ministry, a moment where He declares, I am the resurrection and the life. I mean, it's one thing to claim you're the bread or you're the gate or you're the shepherd, but to say I am the resurrection and the life is a claim that no one else could make or has made. And today, Jesus will declare and demonstrate His power over the last and most irresistible enemy of humanity, death. And it'll leave us with this question at the end. Who is this man? And who will He be to you? I'm going to ask you to stick with me today. We're going to read a story in John chapter 11 that has some tension and some tough tension that we have to wrestle with, and hold on with me till the end. I've got to be restrained in some ways today because this story is a precursor, a foreshadowing to Resurrection Sunday. I'll say it this way. This is the lightning, but thunder is coming. Come on. I knew you were going to be with me. And so I'm going to be trying to give you the lightning, but Easter morning, the thunder is coming. And so in John chapter 11, Jesus is in this moment, and He's just declared that He is the gate, He is the good shepherd, He is God. And at that, the religious leaders get angry, and they actually try to stone Him. They start gathering stones, and their goal is to kill Him by throwing large stones. And so Jesus and His disciples move away. They get away from that dangerous moment, and word comes to Jesus from His dear friends, Mary and Martha, that His friend Lazarus is sick. And in the beginning of John chapter 11, they say, the one whom you love is sick. And so they're making this appeal on the basis of love. And Jesus had moments where He had His disciples, and He had moments where He was interacting with people in the community. But Mary and Martha and Lazarus were at a different level of relationship. They were friends. And when Jesus would travel, many times He would stay in their home. And we see this dear, dear relationship that Jesus had with them. And this will require Him to go back to Bethany, which is 2 miles outside of Jerusalem, the place where there is danger, where there's a bounty on His head. And they appeal to Him saying, the one whom you love, Jesus, we're friends, we're family. And they were sure He would be prompt to come. And though His disciples warn Him of danger if He goes to where Lazarus and his sisters live in Bethany, Jesus still goes. But yet He waits. Jesus doesn't go right away. He waits 2 more days. And something happens in that time frame. Lazarus dies. He succumbs to his illness. Lazarus dies. He's buried in a tomb. And then Jesus starts His 2-day journey to their home. And on His way, we pick it up in John chapter 11, verse 21. Martha runs out to meet Jesus as she sees him coming and says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." It's a tough statement. A moment of blame and of rebuke. Jesus, if you had come, my brother wouldn't have died. Yet even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Your brother will rise again, Jesus told her. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. You see, Martha had a belief here that once you die, if your faith is in Jesus, you will be resurrected for eternity. And she understands that eternity is taken care of, but there's still grief and difficulty in this moment. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world. It's a moment filled with some tough questions, some tensions. We're dealing with people that Jesus loved. We're dealing with a family situation, and yet there's death. And there's questions of why Jesus did it take so long. Have you ever felt like Jesus took a little while longer than you had hoped? Maybe you've had a prayer or a moment and you expected him to show up or come through, yet the situation didn't turn out like you had hoped and prayed. Mary and Martha are in this moment. They know that Jesus is the miracle worker. They know that he is the healer. They know that their brother is sick, and they think in their mind, if he's willing to come and heal anyone, it would be Lazarus. Yet Jesus intentionally chooses to stay 2 days longer. Right where he's at. Seems in no rush. Seems in no panic. And in Jewish thought, that when a person died, their spirit would leave their body, but it could revisit for a few days. But after the fourth day, death, decay, stench, odor was present, and the spirit was gone forevermore. And so Jesus waits until there's this fourth day so that there's no doubt that Lazarus is dead. Not just dead, dead. Not just dead, rotting dead. Not just rotting dead, stinky, filthy, deteriorating corpse dead. Like leaves no doubt about it in the mind, and then he chooses to go. And Jesus is making the point that this is not going to be a resuscitation. It's going to be a resurrection. Bethany was just 2 miles from Jerusalem, where Jesus' enemies were actively plotting to kill him, and there was a bounty on his head. And Jesus doesn't just come to provide resurrection and new life. He came to declare that he is the resurrection and the life. And so as you navigate difficulty, as you navigate tensions, as you navigate prayers and moments where you feel like you need God, this story speaks to the tensions and help us walk through them with faith. And here's the first thing. The first thing to help us in the tension is the pace of Jesus. If you have the Life Center app, there's going to be some notes in there and you can fill in the blank. If you don't have that, you can download it real quick and you can follow along with the message every week. It says this in verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. That's a heartwarming statement. Jesus loved them. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days. Now that's a troubling statement. The heartwarming statement is Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Yet when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 more days. I mean, if I were writing this story or telling Jesus, I'd be like, hey, it's time to go. Now's the moment. Like, let's just get there as fast as we can. But the pace of Jesus is not always our pace. And here's what I found. When someone else's pace is not yours, it's frustrating. You ever been with someone that walks way faster than you? You're like, what's the hurry? Can we just slow down and enjoy life? And then if you're with someone that walks slower than you, you're like, what are you waiting on? We got things to do. We got places to go. We got things to see. And you're the same person demanding both ends of the spectrum because we like things to work at our pace. We like things to go at our speed. We like things to go in the rhythms that we enjoy. And here's what I found. God does not operate at my pace. And I don't know when He's going to get it. I don't know when He's going to understand it. But God, I need you to move at the pace that I like. The challenge is He doesn't. Nor is He going to. And so that pace can be frustrating. It can be heartbreaking. It can be in moments of difficulty. And we see it in these women's response. They both come to Jesus and say, if you had come, He wouldn't have died. From the perspective of Mary and Martha, Lazarus' death happened too soon. And Jesus' arrival was not soon enough. I bet in this room we all have if statements. God, if you had stepped in. God, if you had healed. God, if you had answered this prayer, then things would be different. We're living in this in one of our close friendships right now. My dear friend Steve, he's a pastor in Ohio. We were roommates in Bible college and had dreams and talks of what pastoring is going to look like. And then tension entered our journeys. Not with each other, but with life. And when Steve's oldest son, Blake, was 3 years old, he got diagnosed with cancer. Tension, difficulty. And we prayed and prayed for God's healing. And through a series of miracles and doctors and treatments, Blake went through a journey. He rang the bell, was cancer-free. And lived cancer-free for that first 5 years and got to be in that stage they now call remission. But at the age of 13, started suffering some pain in his back. And they did some tests and realized that there was a massive tumor. And it's a different form of cancer and a more aggressive form of cancer and one that's not as easily treatable. And so there's this heartache. God, we prayed, we saw the miracle. We continue to pray. We continue to believe, yet our eyes see the condition not getting better, but getting worse. Their family came out to the Northwest. He's from the Northwest, and they were here in December because the doctor said this might be the last time he's able to fly unless there's a miracle. I asked Steve, I said, is there anything Blake would like? He's like, what do you want, some pepperoni sticks? I've got a freezer full of elk pepperoni sticks. He's like, I don't know. And he gave him pepperoni stick. And I got this picture in my office of Blake sitting on a plane with this giant smile and this 6-inch long pepperoni stick. And it made my heart happy for a moment because we were able to bring a little bit of joy in the midst of pain and discomfort. But I don't want Blake just smiling. I want Blake healed. I want Blake restored. I want Blake to have that cancer removed and his life be a testimony of God's healing power. Yet there's tension and difficulty in the journey. There's moments like, God, if you would heal him, then. Yet it's a journey of trust and trusting God. And we all have those own moments in our story and in our journey where we feel like things are going to break us. The tension is overwhelming. It's too difficult. But we also get into this moment in this tension where we see the purpose of Jesus. And he makes it clear in verse 15. Jesus was clear on his purpose, and he said this, that people would believe. Now that can be an amen statement, or that can be a very difficult statement. That God would be glorified through all this mess. You mean Jesus allowed it to get messy before it got better? He did. He allowed Lazarus to die? He did. He allowed everyone to grieve and be distraught? He did. And his purpose was so that people might believe. And this is hard to think about, but I want to bring you to this truthful reality in Scripture, that Jesus' goal was not for Lazarus to live. It was his goal for people to believe. And in order that they might believe, he then brought Lazarus to life. Amen. That's tough. I want to think about this, that God just wants me to be happy, successful, wealthy. His goal is that people might believe. And that he'll use his church and people that are in the midst of tension and difficulty that will remain faithful to him. And sometimes he allows us to remain in that tension, in that difficulty, without resolution, so that when he does bring resolution, when he does show up, people might believe. And people might believe in him and who he said he was. And so he didn't raise Lazarus to life so that Lazarus might live. He brought Lazarus to life so that people might believe. But even in the midst of this tension, we see the presence of Jesus. In verse 32, it goes on to say, as soon as Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and told him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. When Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews who had come with her crying, he was deeply moved. He was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. Verse 34, he says, where have you put him? He asked. Lord, they told him, come and see. And then we get these two words in John chapter 11, verse 35. It says, Jesus wept. Jesus wept. And someone would look at the story and be like, well, why is he crying? It's his fault. He could have shown up earlier. He didn't need to take 2 days. He could have shown up. He could have taken care of this mess before it ever created a mess. He could have brought the answer before any tears were necessary, and it was only joy and rejoicing. But yet he looks at people in the midst of their pain, in the midst of their sorrow, in the midst of their hurt. And he doesn't say, get over it. He doesn't say, get through it. He doesn't say, why are you crying? He pauses and he weeps. That's the God you have. The one who has feelings but isn't controlled by his feelings, but yet feels things and mourns with those who mourns. He sees you in your pain and difficulty and tension, and he comes into it. And he comes into it to be with you even before he resolves it. Even before he brings the answer. Even before he brings the healing. And he weeps. Sometimes we are so faith-focused that we forget the reality of we're human as well. I want to let you know that this is a safe place and a welcome place to journey through some of the tension that you're facing in this world. Some of the heartache and challenges that have brought you to this place. And sometimes there's not a one service that will bring an answer and change everything. Sometimes it's a journey of days, weeks, months, moments of being in the presence of God and with the people of God. Sitting with people who don't have all the answers, but will be present with you and cry. Will feel some of the pain that you've been through in your journey, but yet use that tension to help propel us forward in Jesus. So Jesus pauses and he weeps. He mourns with those who mourn, but he is a present God. He's not just a God who feels, he's a God who has power. So we see the power of Jesus. And Lazarus in this tomb, he approaches this tomb, and everyone knows bodily corruption has set in. Decay, stench associated with death was present. And Mary and Martha were not only upset by their brother's death, but also on the failure of Jesus from their perspective to do what they expected. And we pick up in verse 39 here. It says, Martha, the dead man's sister, told him, Lord, there is already a stench because he has been dead 4 days. She says, I don't know what you're about to do, but I want to warn you. What's on the other side of that stone is not good. It's stinky. It's decayed. There is death. And Jesus responded, didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? Didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and looked towards heaven and said, Father, I thank you that you heard me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd standing here, I said this so that they may believe you sent me. So Jesus begins a loud public prayer, and the intention is so that everyone will hear the prayer. He prays this prayer out loud. Father, I know you have sent me. I know you have heard me, but I pray this prayer out loud so that everyone might believe that you sent me. And after he said this, he shouted with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, bound hand and foot with linen strips and his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to them, unwrap him and let him go. I mean, this is the moment. This is the moment. I mean, there was a moment where people had seen blind men healed, lame men walk. They had seen people forgiven, but they hadn't seen the dead raised. And Jesus in this moment, in the midst of their pain, in the midst of their grief, in the midst of the tension and uncertainty, he prays this prayer, and then he looks into this dark tomb, this place of death, and he uses his voice to call out to Lazarus, and it says he shouted with a loud voice. I mean, that's some authority. That's some confidence. Jesus wasn't meek and mild whispering, Lazarus, hey, if you're in there, if you can hear me, like, come out, show everyone this is going to be cool. This is going to really help me in this ministry I'm trying to build and who I say I am. It's not a PR stunt. It's not a moment just to wow people, but it's to allow them to see that Jesus is exactly who he said he was. He shouted into that tomb. Remember in John chapter 10 when he says, and the sheep will know my voice and they will follow me? He shouts, Lazarus, come out. I think he had like that T.D. Jakes voice. Get up, get up, get up, get up. Come out, come out, come out. You know, he was this authoritative voice, and Lazarus comes out. Lazarus' heart started beating. Blood was flowing through his vessels. Brain activity was reignited. The rotting tissue was healed. Strength entered to his joints, tendons, and muscles. And Lazarus, who had been dead for 4 days, came out. He walked out. Death to life. But he was bound hand and foot. So Lazarus, sometimes we got this picture. He came out and he's like, yes! Lazarus came out like this. Bound hand and foot with a cloth over his head. He couldn't see anything. He just knew he was alive. And Jesus had to speak. Will someone go and unbound him and take those cloths of death off of him? Amen. You see, Jesus is both the one who brings resurrection to life and resurrection over death. There is new life that he gives to us on this side of eternity. That those of you who are dead in sin, that those that have not given their life to Jesus yet, he wants to speak your name, call you to come out of sin and the dark places and the dark habits and step into new life with him. But here's what happens. You come out a little bound. You're alive in him, but you don't know a new way of living, a new way of thinking, a new way of learning. And this is the beauty of the church. We don't be like, they can't even walk yet. They're looking funny. They still kind of smell like death. Yeah, people been through some stuff. They've been through some moments and Jesus has brought new life into them, but there needs to be an unbounding and a releasing that the church comes alongside and says, this is how we now live. This is how we now walk. This is how we now love. And we get to help in that promise and in that process. At his voice and at Jesus' command, the dead experience life. We live in a world full of death. Not just death in physical ways and violence, but in spiritual ways. There's a lot of dead people walking. There's a lot of dead people partying. There's a lot of dead people living their own way and own thinking, yet there's no life in Jesus. And God has brought Life Center into this community, into Pierce County, so that people might be released from their places of death and bondage and step into new life with Him. Not only is there the power of Jesus, but there's the promise of Jesus. In all your tension and all your difficulties, here's the promise in verse 25. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. To the one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Will never die. And so this is a twofold statement. And you can summarize this up. The end is not the end. The end is not the end. Death, it's not the end. Because God has promised for those who believe in Him that death is not the end, but it becomes the beginning for eternal life. And those who choose to believe in Him, death is just a comma. It's not a period in your story. Because death marks the new beginning with Jesus. So I'm getting into Easter. I need to calm down. Lightning only. Thunder is coming. All right, here we go. But it's simply a transition from our current reality into the existence of eternal life. And even on this side of eternity, death is just the beginning for the believer. And when Jesus speaks to dead things, they come alive. When Jesus speaks to dead things, they come alive. And He shouted with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out bound hand and foot with linen strips and with his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to them, unwrap him and let him go. What may seem dead can live again. And when you come alive in Jesus, you must discard the garments of death. You must throw off the ways of old thinking and old living and be unbound and free in who Jesus is. And He leaves everyone who witnessed and saw this that day. And He's left the rest of us in the world to answer this question. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? You see, because resurrection is at the heart of Christian faith. If we do not believe that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, if we do not believe that Jesus can raise us from the dead, if we do not believe that Jesus conquered death and the grave Himself Easter morning, then this is a faith with a giant hole in the center. You see, without Christianity, without resurrection Christianity, it's empty, it's irrelevant, and it's vainly moralistic. And all this comes down not to the argument is can we live again, but to the person. Is Jesus who He said He is? Is He the resurrection and the life? To those that believe in Him, will they truly be raised once they die? And those that truly believe in Him, will they never die? You see, Jesus is the resurrection and the life. And as long as there's life and death, there is no more relevant or powerful person than Jesus Christ. He's not the one who just performs resurrections. He is the resurrection and the life. D.L. Moody, a famous evangelist from the Victorian area, said this. Someday you will read in the papers, D.L. Moody of East Northfield is dead. And the truth is, that will be the same of all of us. That there'll be an obituary. Tyler Schaefer of North Spanaway is dead. But he went on to say this, don't you believe a word of it. At that moment, I shall be more alive than I am now. The paper might say your life has ended. But to the believer in Jesus, don't you believe a word of it. Because you will be more alive with Christ and for eternity than you will at any other time in your life. And what you believe about what happens when you die determines every day how you live. It deals with how you live in the tensions of the moment. Will they break you or will they propel you forward? How would these apostles and these disciples who were scared around a campfire and when Jesus died, they scattered, now in the face of death, not give up, not give in, because they'd experienced resurrection power. And if we believe that Jesus is the resurrection and the life, it will change how you live. It will change how you love. It'll change how you deal with your worries and your stresses and your fears, because nothing can overtake the believer. Nothing. There's nothing you face, even as hard as it is, and with grief in the moment. And this is not a place where we're fake or we're false. I want you to be as real and honest as you can, because Jesus sees you. He's present with you. He'll weep with you. But that's not the end. It's a moment in the journey. And the end is when you enter into His presence and you see Him face to face, and everything inside of you just falls down and worships, because you are in the presence of God, where there'll be no more tears, no more pain, no more heartache, and we will be in His presence forever. And so I'm not going to wait for that day to live for it. I'm going to live for that now. I'm going to live with that in the mind, in the heart, in the perspective. And we're going to live so that others get to know and experience that in their life. And so who is this man? Who is this Jesus? And who will He be to you? Today, He would stand before you and say, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe?